Hi, and welcome to another episode of the NPC Sports Podcast. My name is Ben, coming here from the NPC headquarters. I'm joined as always by Logan from the NPC compound in a remote, undisclosed location, and Dakota in another one of our satellite campuses. Folks, how are you guys doing this morning?
I'm doing well.
Swell.
I'm doing well, Logan. Why haven't you moved the power drill bag yet? It's in the same place that it's been for
So,
the past month.
so that's actually where it's been living because my child has gotten increasingly more mobile over the last couple months.
So
So
give
we're
him something to
constantly
trip
having
to
to,
trip over.
yeah, so we're constantly, yeah, he's definitely going up and down basement stairs right now. Um, so we're constantly having to baby proof things. So I was keeping the toolbox in the garage, but that felt like too much of an inconvenience to constantly go out there. This is a lot easier. So that's why it's living there.
Okay. All right.
Is that a satisfactory answer?
I just think it's laziness. You could have just said you're being lazy. We all do it.
It would be lazy if I were making a concerted effort to put it there out of convenience, but there was thought behind that.
Always an
All
explanation,
right,
man.
Ben, pick up the
I
pieces.
guess so. All right. We have to dive in. There is a lot to talk about today. Um, let's go with the Brad Marchand trade first. I mean, this thing sent shockwaves through Bruins dumb. Um, Brad Marchand, among other moves, is sent to Florida. It seems like the particulars of this are trickling out in the last few days since it's gone down. But I guess just like, what was your guys' initial reaction, and then what is your reaction now as you've learned more and more from this move?
My initial reaction was that like being in sports media has ruined my life as far as a sports fan because I felt absolutely nothing. I had I had
I did too. I'm glad you said that. I did too.
I opened up my phone, I saw it, and I went, huh, yeah. I didn't do anything, and I don't know if it's sports media, but I think I actually traced it back to the Game 7 loss to the Blues. I think that was the turning point for me, where I felt nothing since then. Nothing can bother me as much as that. All emotion, and then you just add on being around these guys, and you like the human factor ramping up, and you realize it's hard to attach as much emotion to it as you did when you were younger. So it's like, I don't know, the Marchand news came through and I felt absolutely nothing and didn't care. It was interesting, but I'm like, he's old, like he's clearly on the back nine. They probably had to trade him. I thought it made sense, but I know, Logan, I think you pay closer attention to the Bruins and the other players around the league than I do. So I'm curious on your thoughts.
Well, that your take veered into a very existential direction about sports
Yeah.
fanhood, which I will say, having entered my 30s now, I feel quite similarly.
Yeah, nothing
Um,
matters and we're all gonna die.
yeah, I actually am. It's funny that you brought up the Game 7 loss to the Blues because that's not what
You
turned
were
me
there,
into a
weren't you?
nihilist. I was there.
Oh,
That is not what turned me into a nihilist as it relates to sports, but it did signal the beginning of the end of this era of the Bruins, as far as I'm concerned. And we can get into that a little bit more later. I was ultimately not surprised that the Bruins ended up trading him. I remember when the rumor first came out of like, the Bruins would consider trading Marchand if they continue to be in a free fall. I wasn't that surprised by that. He's a 36-year-old who is a pending free agent on a team that's in a free fall and at the absolute best would back into the playoffs and probably get smacked by the Panthers or someone again in the first round. So if we're taking this is Brad Marchand, who's been with the team since the last time they won a cup thing. It's like, yes, from an emotional standpoint, that is obviously tough. From a pure hockey standpoint, it makes total sense. And the other thing I will say, the one big reaction that I've just not understood is the griping about the return. He is, again, a pending free agent. He is a straight rental. Like there's a chance the Panthers keep him, but operate under the assumption he's a straight rental who is out week to week. You don't know when he's going to be back. You don't even know if you're going to have him for the playoffs. So the fact that the Bruins got a conditional pick that can turn into a first is a massive deal. But they were never going to get like multiple first round picks for him while he was injured. So the circumstances were just messy in the first place. But I also can't say I blame the Bruins for not wanting to, we have to know what the numbers are, but I don't blame them for not wanting to overextend for Brad Marchand's age 37 through 40 seasons or whatever. Like that, this team has hitched its wagon to so many bad contracts over the years that, I think it's perfectly sensible to not budge, even if the optics of it weren't great.
Yeah, well, I also think like they clearly did him a solid by sending him to a team he wanted to go to, and when you make that choice, you kind of you make your bed and you have to live with it. Like they lose a little bit of leverage in that spot. Where I'm sure if they truly shopped him around and would have just said, well, he also had a no trade clause, so I don't know what
Yeah,
teams
and
were on that list.
that messes with a lot.
But it's like, in hypothetical world where they were truly just sort of able to shop to the highest bidder, I'm sure they could have gotten a first round pick, but you lose a lot of the leverage when you sort of say, hey, we're going to send you where you want, because then, the Panthers kind of have you over a barrel at that point. But and speaking of the Panthers, and to the point I was saying earlier, I've seen a lot of people like all, bemoaning the fact that he was sent to the Panthers, because of how the Panthers have kicked the Bruins' ass the last couple of years. And they're like talking about it as if it's this like emotional gut punch, like as if they're the Yankees or they're the Lakers or they're the Jets. And it's like, I know the Panthers have beat the Bruins the last couple of years, but it's not like they're the Canadians. Like, I don't see why anyone
Yeah.
would care about that. Like, I don't.
But they are.
I actually
You got to remember too, this generation of Bruins fans. I mean, the Panthers are there as a Bruins fan. The Panthers are the number one obstacle. The same way that maybe 8-9 years ago it was the Lightning.
The Bruins were that for the Hurricanes.
Yeah,
for a few years.
we think about no, because we're of a certain age where the Panthers are. I know in your guys' fandom, the Panthers have never really been relevant. I remember, when they in the '90s they were relevant for a year, but the funny thing is that the Bruins are not a rival to the Panthers. If that makes any sense, they don't really even consider the Bruins to be relevant.
Again, the Bruins Carolina reference, like the Bruins would sweep the Hurricanes all the time.
Yeah. I think that we are in a bad spot if I'm the sentimental one, because I did think I understand the business side of it. I think it was a good deal for the Bruins to get something out of Marchand, get something for Marchand. And I also thought it was a good move for the player. I also thought it was a good move for the team. That's a team that has a championship window right now, and they could use someone with some Stanley Cup experience to come in there and fill one of their middle or maybe bottom lines and get them over the top. All that being said, from a fan standpoint, Marchand is one of my last favorite players, if that makes any sense. There's very few professional athletes that I legitimately love to watch, and I love the way they approach the game. I love the way they compete. For me, right now, it's really only him and Jalen Brunson. Like, those are the only two professional athletes where I like, oh, there's a game on, I want to watch a game that they're playing in, because I love their approach. I love everything about their attitude. So to that degree, it did stink, that I won't be able to watch when healthy Brad Marchand, 3-4 times a week now, to do that. The bonus for that, though, is that now I get to watch him do that maybe once every other week on national television, do that with another group of players who I think share his level of feistiness, to put it kindly. And I think that the Panthers with Brad Marchand in a either Eastern Conference Finals or Stanley Cup Final, that's going to be a lot of fun to watch come the spring.
Yeah, and to your point about like the last favorite athletes, I guess if you're just sort of sticking in our generation, you're a little bit older than us, Ben, but I feel like, yeah, it's Marchand, it's Bergeron. Bergeron was a big hit for that. Maybe Pedroia, coming after Ortiz. Patriots are different, right? If you remove Brady, like Edelman was maybe the last link to that really sort of mattered. Hard to come up with one in the Celtics because that's not like I don't think Marcus Smart was like on the level of those guys, even though he kind of felt like a true Celtic in that regard. I'm not sure if fans attached to Brown or Tatum in the same way that Red Sox fans attached to Pedroia. I don't know. Maybe I'm not making any sense, but it is true that like Marchand is one of the few last sort of favorite players from our generation.
I mean, it definitely shifts the culture of the team in my eyes.
Yeah.
And I liked what I saw from Pasternak in Tuesday's game. I mean, he seemed like someone who, for the first time, was acting like it was his team, and it's kind of a shame that it had to wait until Bergeron and Marchand and Krejci and those guys were gone for him to kind of look like that. But I was a little skeptical about like whether they actually will have a captain for the near future. But at least given the effort that they showed last night and the attitude, I think that this team is going to be interesting to watch the rest of the way. And I don't think it was going to be interesting to watch if it was necessarily the Coyle Marchand show the rest of the way.
I totally agree with that. I mean, they need a fundamental shift in philosophy, which is where I go to the take of like they need wholesale changes in management. But the reason that you like that wholesale changes, Cody, I'm right too. So I'm glad earlier that you brought up the point about losing game 7 of the cup final, because to me that signaled a massive shift where they decided they just needed to be like this bruising physical team to play against. I think the most telling move of that entire generation was a 1-for-1 swap of Nick Ritchie for Danton Heinen. Like that right there tells you all you need to know about. They took a guy who was a responsible two-way forward and replaced him with just a bruising guy who would maybe get you 25 points in a season. And the signing was a disaster. And they started shifting towards that philosophy of we need to get bigger. We're losing in the playoffs. We're getting pushed around. No, the reason that they lost to the Blues were because they had no secondary scoring and they were shuffling David freaking Backus and Carson Kuhlman on the second line of the Stanley Cup during the Stanley Cup final. Like that's why
David
they lost.
Backus.
I remember it was like, all right, in goes David Backus, like here goes nothing. And so that's why Nikita Zadorov is here. They decided that they need to be this big physical team. Well, the thing they always lack is freaking skill. And so that's why, like, I like Coyle, good, strong player, but I've got no issue swapping him with Casey Middlestat because there's at least some skill. Like you saw the goal, I think it was the tying one, the tic-tac-toe goal with, I think it was Lindholm, Middlestat, and then Pasternak. And it was like, I haven't seen the Bruins, like a Bruins line that does not feature both Marchand and Pasternak move the puck like that in God knows how long. And so I'm not dismissing the need for them to have, these strong physical players. But when you blow every first round pick on guys like Johnny Beecher in the hope that they're like a 20 point a season guy who can just like fill a third line role at best, like they need to stop drafting like that, which is why Sweeney needs to be gone. And there's nothing wrong with having a fair amount of skill in your middle six. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't give a shit that Casey Middlestat can't do a pull up. Like, I really don't. He can move the puck better than anyone else on the roster right now, except for Pasternak.
Yeah, and the other reason that I like the moving Marchand, even if I don't like moving Marchand in a vacuum, is that this forces their hand. They've acted on the coach, they've acted on the core set of players. It's like, if this is still not working, the only place to go after this is the front office. Like you can't continue to punt things outside of Sweeney or even Neely because you've punted everything at this point. They're the only things left. They're the only balls left to kick.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, never mind the fact that, like, first of all, this is a take some of you might roll your eyes at, but like the Mitchell Miller thing was fireable in and of itself. I think that showed.
I'm kidding.
I agree with you. I thought that was that was one of the most tone deaf business moves in like not just in sports, like in the history of running a business. Like that was like, do you not have like the internet?
Well, because yeah,
It
and it
calls
was
the entire vetting process into question about every single free agent. Like if they were the aloof tone that they took to all of that was just insanity to me. So
yeah, and
go
I
ahead,
think
Dakota.
yeah, I just think that that would have been a tone deaf stupid thing to do anytime, but especially like at the time when it happened, when like people like were like more sensitive than ever before, but like culturally, like it was especially tone
And the
deaf.
team was flying high, right? Wasn't
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, it
they
was
were.
yeah.
It was bizarre on so many levels, but to me, so like that would have been an opportunity to get out from Sweeney. But ultimately, it's like, how is he the one who has averted blame in all of this? Because it's not just Jim Montgomery and tearing down the roster. Like they let Bruce Cassidy basically get run out of town by the players, and poetically, he goes and he wins a cup the next year. That should have signaled some very big culture issues. That should have called into question about where the direction of the team was going. You know, the idea they held on to the idea that it was going to be the Chara Bergeron Bruins forever. The second that guys started taking bigger deals and you started having these contracts that were over 10 million, those days were over. So they needed to start to figure out how to build a roster better, which I think exposed Sweeney. And then you look at the fact that he's tried to change the identity of this team so many times and to no avail. Like they need a different voice in there.
What they also need to do, stop building through Sweden. I've,
I
I've just
actually,
I was thinking
I
about this
mean,
yesterday,
I'll
and I
let
was
you
like,
walk yourself into that first.
there are so many like between both Lindholms, the Carl Soderberg thing back in the day, Sagan for Louis Eriksson. What was it like their
Joakim
first pick?
Nordstrom,
Yeah, their first pick a few years ago on Axel Anderson
Lysell.
You know what they say, you
and
got two Lindholms.
Axel Anderson and Lysell. Yeah, it's like I'm just can we maybe look elsewhere?
All
But
right.
my
Cody is anti-Swede.
yeah, I am anti-Swede. I did for a moment. I bought into the Carl Soderberg hype back in the day.
A
The one thing,
productive NHL player for a while,
yeah.
the Carl Soderberg.
Um, I was thinking too. What the one kind of bummer about the Bergeron thing or the Marchand thing, at least for me, is I'm a sucker for records. I don't know why. I don't care about much in this world, but I like records. And what? So he leaves with 422 goals. That's five behind Bergeron for third place, 57 behind Esposito for second. I'm not sure whether he would have gotten to Busick at 545. So it would have been like around 133. I don't know if he had that much juice in him, but ultimately it probably doesn't matter anyway because Pastrnak, as long as he stays with the Bruins, would have eclipsed him anyway. I mean, Pasternak's only 41 behind him. So, but it would have just, he leaves five away from being top three in team scoring history, and he was probably a shoe in to hit second. So, you know, again, I like records, so
Yeah.
kind of a bummer.
He's an all-time Bruin, and I think on the flip side, it's not. I saw on Reddit someone was talking about they're crying in North Station when they heard the news. That's a little bit over the top. On the flip side, he is an all-time Bruin, and saying like, "Oh, it's only Brad Marchand. It's not like it." It's like, no, it's not like it's Johnny Busick. No, it is. Like he's not in like the ore stratosphere, but no, he's up there. He's at least Rick Middleton. If we retire Rick Middleton's number, who I really like Rick Middleton. Marchand's an all-time Bruin without a doubt.
Yeah, it's
I
interesting.
mean, if
Like
he
this is
doesn't
like a.
play,
I was gonna say it's interesting that the difference, like when a trade is more sad, or the reaction's more sad than angry. Like this, it seems people are just kind of bummed, and then whereas like the Mookie Betts trade was pure anger, right? And I'm not sure, and I
Yeah,
don't think people considered Mookie Betts an all-time Red Sox. It was more he would have been an
that's
all-time
a
Red
really
Sox.
good point,
that's a
Dakota. Because like, Logan's about. I think it's a really
I
good point because for me, this trade personifies all of the mistakes that they have made over since 2019, or even before 2019, because it's like it didn't have to get to this point. We could have
Right.
gotten to the point where Brad Marchand was aging gracefully and they had another strong core, with McAvoy and Pasternak, and it hasn't been that way. So as a result, they need to trade him away for a second round pick.
they cannot draft.
Oh no.
Like that's why Sweeney can't be here. I mean, how is the fact that the last like legitimate homegrown player that they've had who's like a bona fide core piece is McAvoy, who got drafted 9 years ago now? Like It's just been so lean. Lysell hasn't worked out. Like Beecher's a fine player, but he's a bottom six guy, which he always projected to be. It's just an absolute debacle. You cannot have Sweeney running the draft again. But as it relates to Marchand and his standing, in Bruins lore, I if he doesn't play in Bergeron's shadow, I mean, for one, he probably wins a few Selkies, but I don't think he has gotten enough credit for his ability as a defensive player. Like, he is an incredible two-way player. Like, watching him on the penalty kill when it was him and Bergeron as the two penalty killing forwards, like, that was some of the most incredible hockey I've ever watched. Just the puck possession whenever they'd get it and the ability to score. Like, it felt like they were playing 5-on-5. So I agree with the point about like Rick Middleton and whatnot. Like if he clears the bar, Marchand, it's not even a thought. Um, Now, I'm a little on a different page than you guys in terms of the reaction. So I feel like I have seen like I think I ultimately land at a different place because I feel like I've seen anger. Like I feel like it fans are recognizing that this is a microcosm of everything that's gone wrong, that there's no help coming because they haven't been able to draft in over 5 or 6 years. Uh, but I've sensed that as like unbridled rage was the reaction
Hmm.
I've kind of seen more so than like there is this sadness. And I think certainly now there's the sadness, but in the initial 24, 48 hours, like I feel like I saw a lot of like angry condemnation.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
mean,
I don't think so because I think more people look at this trade as with understanding why it happened and seeing why it is the right thing to do than did with like the Mookie Betts trade. Even though like I remain a partial defender of that trade, but I think there are far more people that look at this one and go like, I get it, but it sucks and it didn't have to be this way. But maybe you've seen more like outrage than I have. I haven't seen it,
I
but
also I just think that's a tough comparison too because we're talking about like Brad Marchand at the end of his career versus mortgaging 13 years of Mookie Betts. Like to me, I understand the rage more. And I don't know. Like
okay.
I get being sad about the Marchand thing, but I feel like that hasn't been as much of what I've seen. But maybe we're just looking in different places.
Okay. All right. We could go around for this all day. Obviously, this is a gigantic deal. Just want to make sure that we don't get in circles about what's sad, what's angry, what's distraught, what's which smiley face emoji we're talking
What's
about.
somber?
Um, want to shift gears to the Patriots because it's been a busy weekend, week and a half, whatever it might be. Patriots, just to give a summary of some of their moves. Defensive tackle Milton Williams, defensive back Carlton Davis, linebackers Robert Spillane and Harold Landry, defensive tackle Kyrus Tonga, I think that's the way it's said. Among others, third string quarterback Josh Dobbs has been a really active free agency period for the Patriots. And I guess I'll say kind of either specifically what do you think this does to their draft calculus, and then just more generally, your guys' thoughts on those additions thus far.
um, it's tough. I think the good thing is you don't want to go into the draft in a position where you have to draft based on need, especially on both sides of the ball. You want to be in a position where, like, yeah, you're gonna look at, especially if you have a quarterback, but or if you need a quarterback, but that's kind of separate. Like, yeah, you're always gonna partially draft for need, but ideally you just want to take the best player available and augment the roster. And so I think at minimum right now they're in a spot where they can go in. Yeah, they need a tackle, and yeah, they need to get a receiver somewhere, but it doesn't have to be all they do. They can go in and sort of take the best player available, at most of their spots, and I think that's a good thing. Especially like I still think there's absolutely a scenario where they trade for a number one receiver, whether that's signing Cooper Cup and trading for number one receiver, or it's one or the other. I don't know. But if they can somehow accomplish that one too before the draft, then you really just need a tackle, and then the rest of the draft becomes much simpler. So I think that's a good thing. And overall, on their free agency class, I think certainly they've overpaid for guys. Like they overpaid for Milton Williams, overpaid for Harold Landry, probably overpaid for for Carlton Davis, maybe Spillane too. But I mean, it's the suck tax, right? Like you have to do it sometimes. That's the position they're in. It's a tough way to live. You don't want to do this often, but I think they had to do it this year. They were dealt a tough hand with needing to do something like this and needing to do it in a year where it's not a good free agency class. So I think they played the hand they were dealt as well as you could have expected them to. But they still have other work to do as far as filling out the depth chart and getting someone at tackle or receiver. I just don't think they're going to be able to get a tackle, of any consequence before the draft. So I think it's the only big addition I'd be looking for before the draft is receiver. But we'll have to wait and see.
Well, I mean, they were in a challenging spot because the roster was devoid of talent, but I this is just because I hate having to build through free agency. I'm largely unmoved by this, even though I like some of these players. It's like Carlton Davis, and the thought of him with Christian Gonzalez is appealing, that they should make a fairly good corner tandem. I hate how much they have to overpay all these guys. Like you go into an offseason just awash with cap space, supposedly, and then it just shrinks up so quick because you have to overextend to sign Milton Williams and whatnot. And so, you know, they have gotten some of the top guys at their respective positions. Like Carlton Davis is an absolute bulldog. Like he's probably the one that I feel most confident with. Milton Williams, I mean, that's a guy who's just cashing a check, basically. I mean, he was about to sign with the freaking Panthers. Like, he was just going to go to the highest bidder, which I get that's what the Patriots have to do because of the position that they're in. But this doesn't answer the overall flaw that is the fact that they need to be able to actually hit in the draft for a change. And the new regime, it's too early to get into that. Like, we need to, give them some runway to sort of figure that out. But for now, I see a team that, patched holes in a way that they need to, like Morgan Moses, perfectly fine stopgap for an offensive tackle. But they need to figure out how they can get themselves to a place where free agency is about adding on the margins with the occasional splash, as opposed to needing to fill the entire roster that way. It's just, the idea that they're going to become Tennessee North and just sign all these Vrabel retreads is like, cool, great. We did this in 2020 when they signed Jalen Mills and Nelson Aguilar and Jonnu Smith and all these guys. And it, 2-3 year window where essentially nothing happened and then they're gone. And so it's like, when you're a team that has to sign a bunch of late 20s, early 30 guys in free agency to fill massive roles in your roster, like that's what you're going to get. So they got to draft.
I don't think this compares to that 2021 spree though, because that was a situation where they did it both on offense and defense. They were getting overlooked guys, like Mills and Nelson Aguilar and Devon Godchow. The one big, well, I mean, I guess Hunter Henry wasn't overlooked, but they were. It was a weird spree for them because they signed a lot of players that usually weren't the kind of players they went for. So I thought the vision was all over the map. Whereas I think this one, it's very clear. Like everybody they got is tough, physical, good culture fits. I mean, I think it wasn't Brian Hoare. It was someone else who spent time in Vegas and said they fully believe that Robert Spillane will be a captain in his first year. Like he's that much of a good locker room guy, plays like a maniac, really physical. Carlton Davis, really competitive, really physical. Miscast as a number one corner, but makes perfect sense as a number two corner. Harold Landry, really physical when he's engaged. Milton Williams, same thing, relentless. Matt Collins, good in the locker room. So I think what you're seeing is Vrabel, if nothing else, wanted to get good football players who can help establish a foundation, both in terms of leadership and culture, but also on defense. Because the other thing is, like, we don't know what the future holds for Christian Barmore. I think that's the most interesting sidebar of the Milton Williams signing. But if he does come back and is able to resume being who he was before going out with blood clots, I mean, you'd have to feel really good about the Patriots defense at all three levels. I mean, they're still a little thin at linebacker, but Spillane is definitely an upgrade over Juwan Bentley. There's no question about that in my mind. And then good at corner, pretty good at safety, and really good up front. So I just think you have to feel a lot better about where they're at the defense now than you did at the end of the season. And obviously it would be even better if Christian Balmer was able to come back.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the defense a lot. What's concerning to me is that these moves suggest to me that they are moving towards drafting Will Campbell at number 4. It sounds like their intel indicates Abdul Carter's not going to be there. You know, and maybe Travis Hunter, I don't know, but it really seems to be trending toward they're going to address offensive line in the draft, and at the spot that they're at, Will Campbell appears to be there. And the reason Will Campbell is concerning to me, and it's not just about his ability to play football. So reportedly, he a year ago his arms measured 32 and 7/8 inches. This year they measured 32 and 5/8 inches. I'm very concerned that his arms are shrinking. Seems like he's losing at least an eighth of an inch every year. Who knows? I mean, he could be, walking around. Maybe you guys can't see me 10 years in, the incredible armless man. And that's a health concern. That's something that, we need to be prepared to help him out with, to get him, one of those special, homes, kitchens with, accessible handles, for when he ends up with,
This is a mean-spirited segment on Will Campbell.
I'm waiting for you to land the plane. I'm like, is he actually concerned about anything relating to his measurements, or is this all just screw him with combine stuff?
Is Will Campbell going to be in a nursing home by the end of this segment?
On this flip side, maybe, we use that, no, this is this is a bad, but we use that Oscar Pistorius technology. We give him mega arms, and he's like got like,
yeah, you definitely want to be the next Oscar
we
Pistorius.
give him cybernetic arms, and then he has like go gadget arms at left tackle, and then he's that talk about turning a weakness into a strength.
So the crux then is that it'd really be best if Abdul Carter was waiting there for the Patriots.
Yeah, I think this goes one of a few ways, and I don't think it's Will Campbell at number 4. If they do go that route, I feel like it might be more for like Armand Membao, who seemed to kind of pass Campbell on a lot of draft boards with how he performed at the combine.
At 4, like, that's my thing is both those guys, everything I hear
Trade
is
back.
good, but
That's where I was
okay,
going. Is
all right.
I don't think they're going to do either of those things, right?
But,
So I think
who's
it's either.
who's gonna take, like, that's the thing. In order to trade back, someone has to want to be at 4. So
Well,
There are
if
so
Shedeur
many
Sanders or
stupid
Travis
teams
Hunter's
in the
there.
NFL. Yeah,
yeah, but you're one of them.
Yeah, I mean, you're not trading with someone who, you're not trading with a team who's at like 20 or 25 and going all the way up there, because there's not a player who's going to be at that spot that warrants that kind of trade up. But if you're at the Giants, or not the Giants, the Raiders at 6, or or no, they wouldn't do it with the Jets, but like the Saints at number 9, right? And Shedeur Sanders is there, or they really want Travis Hunter, or maybe someone wants to move up for Mason Graham. Like, you can field those calls and you just move back a few spots, and then maybe you justify taking Membao at number 8. So I think it'll be, as far as addressing the offensive line, it's either going to be that, it'll be taking the best player at number 4 if it's Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter somehow, and then using that second round pick on a player who you'd like to be ready to start right away, but might need half the season or full season. I mean, I forget who it was, like the 11th overall pick. Was it Fashanu for the Jets last year? And he backed up all season long. So those kind of things happen. So it might be use a second round pick, or take one even later in like the 3rd round, like they did with Caden Wallace, and do the bridge method, which I don't think is a terrible method given the situation that they're in. I know people scoff at this, but like I look at Cam Robinson, and if you want to do Dan Moore and Jalen Moore too, like I don't see a huge or even substantial upgrade from Vidarian Lowe to any of those guys. I know people love to bag on Vidarian Lowe, but when Vidarian Lowe was healthy last year, he was actually pretty decent, at least as a swing tackle. I don't know about a franchise left tackle, but I don't think it's at all crazy to suggest that Vidarian Lowe can be a decent bridge starter if he's healthy and the other 4 spots are set. Like the problem with the Patriots is they've had both tackle spots as holes. in the last few years. You just need to have one of them set because you can game plan around a whole left tackle. You bring the tight end over to help, you chip, you run plays the other side. Like you can manage around it. You can't manage around two tackle spots. So I think the fact they got Morgan Moses, they have Caden Wallace who could come back in from his ankle injury and be ready to go. And so maybe you do a bridge option with a Darian Lowe, or you sign someone like Tyron Smith, who you know he's not going to be available the whole season because he always gets hurt. But you just need like 6 or 7 games out of him, and then that second or third round pick is ready to go. Like I think as we get further into this, that's the more likely option than them signing Cam Robinson or using the number 4 pick on a tackle because I just don't think either of those are good options, and so I don't think they're going to do them.
Well, so look at what the Bears are doing this offseason. They're pouring all their money into the offensive line because their offensive line was porous last year, and they know that Caleb Williams won't have a chance without a ton of help. I mean, they barely even gave Justin Fields a chance. I feel like if the Patriots don't do something substantial at the offensive line, then they're going to end up having to do something like that next offseason. Like Drake May's too important. So I don't have much of an issue. If they took Will Anderson at 4, I'd probably be okay with that. I would sooner prefer they trade back and take a lineman. You know,
I mean,
you can get
Will Campbell, Will
or
Anderson.
did I say Will Anderson? Will Campbell. So I, I would have minimal issue with them trading back if they're going to take an offensive lineman. I have to say the idea of drafting Travis Hunter scares the bejesus out of me. I have no idea what that guy's actually going to be in the NFL, and I think there's a chance that he's an underwhelming player. And the
He just
Patriots
has
just
to be
have such
used
a
right. Someone has to draft him with a plan. I think we talked about this a couple episodes
I
ago.
don't know. I mean, the
I feel better
Patriots,
about Vrabel having a plan and Josh McDaniels having a plan for that than I do Gerard Mayo, Alex Van Pelt, and DeMarcus Covington. Like I
mean,
like, you know,
I agree with that, but this is also the same Josh McDaniels who got Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry together in the same offseason, then was like never running 2 tight end sets where they
it's
were
also the
both
same
running
Josh McDaniels
routes.
that got a 10-7 record in one of the best statistical rookie seasons for a quarterback ever out of Mac Jones. So I'm just
Right.
like,
Yeah.
we're rehashing old storylines, but I think I like Josh McDaniels' ability to figure that out. I'm not saying it's a guarantee. Like there's risk. I'm with you. Like it does freak me out the idea of getting a prospect like that. But I just think they have the capable coaching in place to figure it out.
Yeah, I think smart teams when they have a good young quarterback, they always end up taking an offensive lineman in the first round. When the Bucks got Tom Brady, they drafted Tristan Wirfs. The Chargers when they drafted Joe Alt to protect Justin Herbert because he was getting killed every game. It's like if they don't do this now, if they don't take a big swing, I like Morgan Moses. He's not the answer there. Like he is a short-term option, and so it would not be short-sighted in the least bit. It wouldn't be splashy, but if they used even number 4 and didn't trade back on offensive linemen, I think from a pure roster building standpoint, that makes sense. You have to keep May upright.
I think the biggest bummer for the Patriots in this is that like I still think the solutions that they need or most of the solutions they need are on the roster. They just don't know, and they don't not know because the players have played poorly. They don't know because of injuries and also you have to like they've got the offensive line got awful coaching the last 3 or 4 years. So it's hard to really know. Like I don't think there's any reason to write off Caden Wallace as the future right tackle. He looked I think really good when he got those opportunities in training camp, and then he had a really bad high ankle sprain that wiped out basically his entire rookie season. So like I don't know if I don't have really a take on him. Like he still could be the right tackle. And Cole Strange before he blew out his knee was starting to string together really good games at left guard. And so I don't know. Can he pick up where he left off, or is the move to move him over to center, where a lot of people when he entered the draft thought that's where he was going to be. Like could be a good guard, but could be a Pro Bowl All Pro center. And that might actually be the way to go because it sounds more and more like David Andrews might not be able to come back, but it's like you only got a game and a half look at Cole Strange at center. So how can you go forward with that? And then same thing for left guard. Layden Robinson was what a third or fourth round pick last year, and he looked really good at times in training camp and really good in certain spots during the season, and other times he looked totally out of his depth, and that's because he played right guard in college, not left guard. So he was learning a new position under bad coaches. So it's like I don't have a solid take on him either. So I'm worried about them going out and drafting a lot on the offensive line and signing a lot of offensive linemen when like they still might have most of the answers on the roster. It's just I don't know how you can't bank on any of them because you don't have a reason to. So it's a really tricky spot to navigate for them.
All right, tell you where you better have a take on Rafael Devers, because I want to get your take.
Can I wait? Can I take control of the show for 1 second and rewind? I have one question for both of
How
you.
far back are we rewinding?
10 seconds.
Okay.
Which players in the NFL would you trade the number 4 overall pick for? Like if you're the Patriots, who would you give up that pick for? And not Mahomes or Josh Allen. Like remove those from keep those guys out of it. Non-quarterback players, would you trade that number 4?
So we have to say, like, is this realistic or just like period?
Period.
Yeah.
Maybe a mix of both,
So
but period.
So DJ Moore's the comp. So
Well, no, but that DJ Moore package had like a lot more in it.
Yeah, but
I'm not saying
thing.
number 4 pick in like number 1 next year, number 1 the year after. I'm saying like number 4 and Kendrick Bourne. Right? You know, like I'll just throw it out there like number 4 Kendrick Bourne and Joe Milton for CD Lamb. You know, like or like number 4 for Justin Jefferson or Micah Parsons or Penny Sewell, like those kind of guys. Which ones would the number 4 pick being the top centerpiece of the deal? Which players would you be willing to do that for?
Right, Justin Jefferson.
I would say Justin
one
Jefferson
of few.
and Jamar
I
Chase.
not CD, not Micah.
I'm trying to think if there's anybody defensively that I
Yeah,
I think Parsons.
Mm.
He might be the best player in football. So it's like,
yeah,
if you can get that with the number 4 pick, you know. Chase.
But your
Mark
point
Chase
is that
didn't gotta re-up
the
him.
number 4 pick is valuable in and of itself, and I agree with that. I think that that's true. But the reason that I would be willing to trade the number 4 pick for any of those guys is that I don't think the number 4 pick in and of itself is super valuable this year. And that's why I am skeptical that I'm the one that's holding us up for transitioning now. I'm sorry. That's why I'm skeptical that they will be able to come up with a good trade to trade back from 4, because I don't know that there's going to be anybody available at 4 that any team, no matter how stupid, is going to feel justified in moving up. If the player who's available there is Sanders, Graham, or Campbell, you're not enamored with any of those guys, so you want to trade out. I don't think anyone else is going to be enamored enough with those guys to move up. Everything I'm hearing about Sanders is that he's even less of a top 5 option now than it seemed like he was before, and I didn't even love him that much before. So I don't know.
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's tough for them, right? Because you're not going to do that trade with the Jets, and like it's a problem because let's say that Vegas wants to make that trade to go up and get Shedeur Sanders. You know, you're trying to like, why wouldn't they just wait for Jacksonville, right? Like, just make that trade with Jacksonville. You give up like a slightly less return. But for the Patriots, it's like, so the only way you really convince Vegas of doing that deal is if you like manufacture interest from another team. You're like, oh, well, New Orleans is trying to trade up. We're going to do it with them. And you got to make a better offer because the Jets, you're not doing it with the Jets. The Panthers aren't making that trade because they have Bryce Young. And then 10, 11, 12 is Chicago, San Francisco, and Dallas. And so like they're not trading up for a quarterback. So like it's a pretty specific way that you could convince anyone to move up for that pick and not just say we're going to wait or trade with Jacksonville. So I think to your point, they might not really have a realistic path to trading back.
What if Dallas
I think you
does
guys
trade up and draft Shedeur Sanders?
What if
Let's go.
So I know you're joking, but like I think you guys are discounting how stupid and reactionary some teams are. Like I'm looking at the Panthers and thinking like if Travis Hunter is sitting there, you mean to tell me David Tepper's not going to be like going crazy trying to get them to trade up so they can
That's
try
the
and
one. If
get
Travis Hunter's
Bryce
there
Young.
or Abdul Carter, then a lot of teams would
I
make the
But
call.
then you
But
take one of those if you're the Patriots.
and I think
You
New
absolutely take
Orleans.
Carter, right?
I
yeah,
think
you
New
right, you
Orleans.
do. Well, you take it
New
if it's
Orleans is an
Carter. I don't know
option.
if you take it if it's
Dallas is an
Hunter.
option.
Yeah.
I like the 49ers are having a very weird offseason. Are they tearing it down? They were going to trade up for Mac Jones a few years ago. Are they actually going to extend Brock Purdy? Like, you know, Trent Williams is no longer useful. So they need offensive line help. Like I I also have a healthy amount of trepidation about the players that are there and the justification for doing that. But what wins it out for me is the fact that there are a lot of stupid and reactionary teams. It is not beneath Jerry Jones to do something stupid if he thinks Shadur Sanders is going to be the second coming. Like I just wouldn't rule anything out with any team in like the top 15 to 18.
Fair enough. All right. Now I'm going to move us on to the Rafael Devers drama. Funnily enough, when Alex Bregman was signed, the big question was, where will Rafael Devers play? I think the question now is, will Rafael Devers play? Because as of yet, he has not. And I think one possibility that was floated when he said he's a third baseman and that's where he's going to be is there was concern about kind of a Manny Ramirez style wildcat strike that he would play but not really give his all. I think now we're in the midst of a potential actual strike, not even a wildcat strike. Where you guys see this thing with Rafael Devers going? He is their best player, and as of yet, it does not seem like he is hurrying his way back onto the field this spring.
So wait, let me get this straight. So you think there's a chance that Rafael Devers is totally able and healthy enough to play, but he's throwing a temper tantrum and refusing to play?
I think the fact that he keeps pushing back his date of playing in an actual game, it's not framed well along with what his actions and his words at the start of camp.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Especially because like I think it's today or Wednesday and Thursday he's doing like backfield games against Crochet and Walker Bueller. So like if he's healthy enough for those, why isn't he healthy enough to be in a game unless you're just saying it's because they don't yet want him like diving around at third base with his shoulders. I guess that would be the only reason. So I like a good conspiracy theory. I don't think it's completely outside. I don't think it's completely unrealistic, but I do wonder. Yeah, the further what because opening day is 15 days away. So I think if you get within a week, like if this thing gets pushed back again past Saturday, at which point, yeah, we'll be just like 9 days away from opening day. I mean, yeah, you then there are going to be some really interesting questions that have to get asked.
I mean, if he's hitting on the backfields, I'm not that concerned because he's going to be their DH, so he can satisfy everything he needs to do. I think that this is actually, I have largely been in the position that Alex Cora has handled this about as well as he could. My take on that might actually be shifting a little bit because now I'm starting to think that they should have just stopped with the ambiguity off the jump, which you never knew how Devers necessarily was going to react, but I think it was probably safe to assume it wasn't going to be favorable. And so at this point, they should have just nipped it in the bud. And if they knew clearly like Bregman's going to be the third baseman, they should have established it then and then just dealt with the fallout from there. But this like ambiguity, like, being almost coy about it, like, at a certain point that's going to catch up to you, it has to be a weird cloud over spring training. Like it doesn't, from reporters who are there, it doesn't sound like Devers is doing like a Judon level hold in where he's like causing a ruckus, but it's enough of an issue. And we're 2.5 weeks, 2 weeks and a couple days from opening day, and it's still not resolved. And everyone kind of has inklings about what's going to happen, but it's not actually being said. So at this point, I think they're doing themselves a disservice by continuing to drag this along, because they haven't point blank said like this is an open competition. Whoever the best player is going to win. Like I feel like it hasn't been that cut and dried. It's just like, well, everyone's going to get reps at third. Some people will get reps at second. It's just there needs to be more clarity at this point.
I think the clarity is
it's mid-March.
The clarity is the big thing because I all right, you say you think Cora has handled this well. I think that if Devers is indeed dealing with something physically that is keeping him off the field, and there's a possibility that they knew this, and that's why Bregman started working out at third and has been working out at third this entire time. By Cora not being forthcoming with that health situation, it is making Rafael Devers look bad. And so therefore I can't say I
Yeah.
know I would say that Cora has handled this well, because he might be trying to protect Devers, physically, by not coming out and saying what his physical status is, but by not doing that, he is making it look like Devers is slow walking it back. And the question, whenever Devers shows up and he seems out of shape at the beginning of spring, the Devers defenders always say, "Oh, well, he always shows up a little out of shape and he plays his way into shape over the course of spring training." Okay, if that is indeed true, he's now lost 2 weeks of playing himself back into shape. So I think on both the Devers and the Cora fronts, I'm concerned about the way that this is tracking.
Yeah, no, it's true. I agree with you there. I also just think, you know, it goes to show like a lot can happen during spring training. Like spring training starts and we're all sort of penciling in lineups and making predictions on how the Red Sox are going to line up defensively. But it's like, again, opening day is like under a couple weeks away, and we don't know who's going to play in the outfield because it seems like Wilyer Abreu is not going to be ready. Uh, it seems that Cutter Crawford and Brian Bayo both aren't going to be ready, so that whole 6-man rotation talk is kind of out the window. Lucas Giolito makes his debut yesterday and gets a hamstring injury. So are you going to have to roll with Quinn Priester, Richard Fitz, and somebody else? And then again with
Campbell's
this whole
not hitting
Devers.
well to be either an outfielder or a second baseman, most likely on opening day.
No, even he has turned it around a little bit, but it's like, yeah, I think he has to start the season in the minors, and then with the outfield thing, it's like I think Anthony's done everything you'd want him to do, but ideally he starts the season in AAA, and it's like, so now is Trace Thompson starting over
Having
or
a
getting
great
the roster
spring.
spot over Roman Anthony? So what'd you say, Logan?
I said Trace Thompson's having a great spring.
He is having a great spring.
I
So it's
mean,
just a lot of these things so much can happen during spring training. I think a lot of people thought that by now Liam Hendricks would kind of seize control of the closer role. That hasn't happened. He's been terrible. Early on, it looked like Luis Guerrero might even push for that out of spring training, and he was pitching very well. Struggled a bit the second half of spring so far. So, there are a lot more questions than answers. I think a lot more than the Red Sox would want at this point, but it's also not uncommon for that to be the case in spring.
well, at least they're not the Yankees in terms of their rotation getting decimated.
Right.
But like I agree with the thought that it's like Anthony should probably be beginning in AAA. If he breaks camp with the team, I would say that is still only a good thing because they do have Trace Thompson. They obviously have Rob Refsnyder too. So if they end pulling that lever where Anthony is, your opening day right fielder or something, then I would say that the circumstances would suggest that he actually played his way into that role because they're not completely out of options. That said, I think that the fact that they have had such, like the other week, we were talking about having all this positional versatility, and I am of the camp that that is a good thing. But now we're kind of seeing where it's becoming maybe a detriment because what positions do you actually like? Where there are teams that are about to play regular season games in a week. We're less than 2 weeks away from the Red Sox, or just over 2 weeks away from the Red Sox opening the season. And what positions is there a clear cut person locked in for opening day? Like two, Casas,
Well,
First and catcher.
yeah, and Duran.
right? First and catcher, like
Well,
Duran
Duran's
in
not locked
center.
in. Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, is
But
Duran
but
locked
that
in
position he
center,
can play
or
in
is he
left. The
locked in?
entire
Yeah,
out.
right.
Yep, the entire outfield in
Story at
flux.
story at short.
No,
Story at short.
I thought
Yeah.
Story suffer something like in the last couple days?
I don't think so. I didn't see that. Nothing significant enough.
I mean, it wouldn't
Otherwise,
be
I feel like.
surprising.
But the other sort of wrinkle to this that's interesting is, if the Red Sox want to force it and have either Anthony or Campbell or both be on the opening day roster, I mean, it used to be that teams would keep guys off at the start of the season so they would get that extra service time. But now with the new PPI rules, you're more incentivized to break camp because what is it like if a player accrues a full year of service time and either wins Rookie of the Year or finishes top 3 in either Cy Young or MVP, you get a really high draft pick compensation. So, all things being equal, maybe they probably just would go with Anthony over Trace Thompson, but Trace Thompson's making it awfully difficult. But I think that decision is going to have to be made because at this point, it doesn't look like Willie Abreu is going to be ready at all.
A story was scratched just before yesterday's game with back stiffness.
Okay,
That's right.
well, and that can linger. So yeah, something to watch. Yeah.
All right. Ooh. All right. We're making pretty good time. We've recovered. For our behind the keyboard segment today, want to talk about smart players. Whether it's either smartest players you've covered, or players that perhaps surprised you with how smart they were once you got a chance to interact with them. I have a couple that I can give, but I'll kind of give you guys the opportunity first. Who comes to mind when I cue it up like that?
Well, for me, this was a tough one to answer because I don't know if anybody has surprised me with how smart they are. But I also don't really know how to qualify because I don't really care if somebody graduated college because I don't know what that means for pro athletes most of the time. Like, was it a legit degree or was it not? And then a lot of guys are really good at being fake smart, like Jaylen Brown and Kyrie Irving. So it's true. So it's kind of hard, and I don't, without really spending like a lot of close time with people, you don't know how truly book smart they are, and intelligence is relative, right? Like, what's more important, being smart in one thing versus the other? I don't know. So I kind of just went with people who just I think felt life smart or just generally impressive in that regard after interacting with them. And for me, it was Matthew Slater. It's just, I don't think that's probably a very surprising pick, but it's just one of those guys that you talk to that he's so good at articulating his thoughts clearly and concisely in a way that like is very well spoken, that better at it than me, certainly. And it's my job or was my job to try and do that at a high level. And he's better at it than me, and just obviously knows how to inspire those around him, does a ton of good community work, like all those things. Like you can't do that. All that stuff unless you're really smart. And it's just, every time you ever talk to him, he gave you a great, well thought out answer that was like devoid of platitudes and sort of hollow slogans, and actually answered the question, but made a lot of sense, taught you something, was really insightful. So he's one for me. Another one, Jonathan Jones for the Patriots. And I choose him just because, and a lot of fans might not realize this, he's probably the single most like active player in the community of like any pro athlete in Boston. I mean, the list of like off-field initiatives that he does is legitimately too many to count. Like, I did a story on him a few years ago, and like, oh, there were like dozens. It's all he does is all kinds of different charities. And on top of that, got his pilot's license. And I think he's efforting to get his commercial pilot's license when he's done playing. And on top of that is a really good football player. Like, has at times in his career been sort of a fringe Pro Bowler. And so again, I don't think you accomplish all of those things consistently at such a high level without being really smart, whether that's book smart, life smart, or a combination of the two. I think he's really impressive. And then the last one I would say, as far as on field, just as an underrated one, Marte Mapu for the Patriots. Hasn't translated to actual on field success, but the fact that Bill Belichick gave him, as a third-round rookie, significant run with the first-team defense as both the linebacker and a safety in his rookie training camp tells me an awful lot about how smart of a football player he is, even though I don't necessarily know how good of a football player he is.
Interesting. How about you, Logan?
So there are two that I feel like these wouldn't be that surprising. One of them, the name actually came up earlier, was David Backus. David Backus was he was captivating. And the other is Nick Foligno. Both at the Bruins in, I guess, declining years of their careers. And I still thought that they were incredibly insightful and they did a great job. Like, Backus had been the captain of the Blues, Foligno had been the captain of the Blue Jackets. And then they go into these environments where they're under like Chara and Patrice Bergeron. Foligno wasn't, I don't think, but Backus obviously was, and they fit in just like perfectly. And it was interesting to hear them, like I remember Nick Foligno weighing in on the Jake DeBrusk thing. And it's like Nick Foligno had been through that with, I think, Patrick Laine. He had been through it with Panarin, where that was when DeBrusk wanted out. And it was just like that was someone who really didn't have like the biggest leadership role in the team. But every time he talked about something, it was like you could tell that he was really striking the nuance of the situation. Another kind of random one, and not a player, but Ron Renicky, the one year that he ran the COVID Red Sox, like just a totally hopeless team after the Mookie Betts trade. For some reason, I just remember having to be in on a lot of Ron Renicky's Zoom press conferences. It's like that guy was dealing with a terrible freaking team, but the way that he navigated it and like he would defend players and he had guys' backs without being without throwing anyone under the bus, but he was very forthright about the realities of the situation. And it's just that was a guy who was put in an impossible position right from the jump. And it was just the way that I'm always really impressed when guys are able to strike the balance between being honest and candid while still kind of doing the diplomatic thing that the team wants you to do. Bruce Cassidy was always great about that. And so that's something I always admire when someone can kind of play the PR game, but you also know that they're trying to be forthright about like the fact that a lot of these situations are nuanced. So those are a few for me.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
those
mean,
are
if you're
good.
going to include coaches, then I would have to throw in Belichick, right? For obvious reasons. Not much to add there. Not just in terms of like the football knowledge, but like you hear all these stories about how the Patriots were able to have such a small coaching staff or a small just staff of people for so many years because Belichick was able to basically do the work of like 10 to 12 staffers every day, which is obviously incredibly difficult to do. So
Yeah, it's interesting. It was a good observation by you, Dakota, about like kind of left it too open ended about Smart. I think when it comes to emotional intelligence, that no one was had a higher level of that than Kevin Garnett. The guy just understood what made everybody tick, how to get the best out of everybody. Um, a couple other Celtics guys. One was Jason Collins. He, I'll never forget. He came in. I can't remember if it was training camp or like mid-season. The Celtics picked him up, and he's in the locker room, and you always, you ask somebody a question, they kind of answer it, and then they, wait for you to ask another question. They answer it, and you ask another question. I asked Jason Collins the question, and then he answered it, and then he said, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Whoa, okay." So like, and he like I asked him something about like coming in and assimilating to a new team or whatever, and then he was he's like, well, like when you go to a new job, like how do you do, and it was like a conversation back and forth, and it was really weird, and it's really disarming because like it's rare that this is an actual conversation between us, like we're two human beings. So he was an incredibly kind of like curious, intellectually curious guy. Um, Another guy on the Celtics, this is a blast from the past. Courtney Lee, he was very inquisitive, and I remember him because I know Logan, you have talked about before, like Rob Bradford complaining about people just standing in the locker room. A lot of times with the Celtics, there would be no one in the locker room, so you just would go in and hope someone's there. And Courtney, to his credit, was almost always there. But there's only so many times you can talk to Courtney Lee before a Celtics game in 2013 before you've exhausted everything there.
that was
But
by Dietrich Wise.
but the reason that he was interesting is like if we would be standing there, I had like he would ask me stuff about like the job. Like I remember he like asked me about like this little recorder I had at the time, and he was like how come you use that, everyone else uses their iPhones? And I was like explaining it to him. I was like, oh, I like it, I can hook it up to my computer like USB, I can like save it if I want it, I can send it in. At that time we were still having to like occasionally send in audio that people could clip for videos. He would just ask questions. He's like, yes, he's like, so like how do you get into it? And so he was kind of he was interesting because again, like he wanted to know stuff like the intricacies of like how jobs got done. And then the last guy, Rodney Harrison, I only really interviewed him once, but I do remember I was there to do this sidebar on this wide receiver that everyone's forgotten that was in camp. And not so much that he was, his intellect, but like he understood my job. Like he understood why I was interviewing him. And I was like, hey, I'm doing a story on such and such. And you could tell he was like, okay, I know like the 2 quotes that you want from me on this. So, and he gave me exactly those 2 quotes. And he was like, you got what you need? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, okay. Like it was just very like, this is a great transaction. You understand my mission and you give me what I need. Thank you very much, sir. Have a nice day. Yeah.
Jabril Peppers is like that on the Patriots. Like,
Really.
yeah, really, for what I know is the off-field stuff and everything, but as far as getting a good quote in the locker room and someone who like knows what you're doing, because he's got somewhere to be too, so it's in his best interest to make it as short as possible, but he somehow does that while giving you like exactly what you need in a way that won't piss off the team. So he was really good about that too. It is interesting though what you said about, or like just this whole, how do you describe the intelligence? Like Xander, I didn't ever covered Xander Bogaerts, but like a guy who can speak like 7 different languages, like I would take that intellect, whatever it is, and trade it for mine any day. I'd rather have those skills than like 99% of the skills that I do have. And I think, another guy that comes to mind for me is Cole Strange, who strikes me as someone who, it's like he's like Matthew Slater, but with like 1% of the word usage. So like he gets across his point so effectively and so honestly in like 8 words. And he's really hard to interview because you'll ask him a question and he'll answer it and he's done really fast. He gives you exactly what you need and it's a really good answer and it's really honest. But like you don't really have much time to start thinking about follow-ups. You kind of have to be on it. But yeah, everything he says is really interesting. It's just incredibly brief. So I feel like must mean he's smart to some degree.
Well, you've wasted another hour of your life listening to us ramble on. I know Logan's got to be somewhere to deal with the only child in the history of the human race. But we appreciate you lending us your eyeballs and your earballs for another week. Don't forget to catch us on Twitch, on YouTube. I'm trying to figure out TikTok, but I'm a millennial / Gen Xer. I can't figure it out. So maybe one day we'll be on the talk. But for Logan, for Dakota, thank you very much for another episode of the NPC Sports Podcast.